Level 1. The baseline. You were never a door kicker. You were never meant to wear the multicam or feel the suffocating weight of ceramic plates against your ribs. Before the military machinery absorbed your life, you were a civilian animal behaviorist living in profound isolation within the humid, sprawling pine forests of Ocala, Florida. Your daily existence was defined by the quiet, clinical measurement of operant conditioning and the microscopic realities of canine biology. While the rest of the world looked at a dog and saw a companion, you looked at a dog and saw a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. You understood the exact science of the olfactory detection threshold, the microscopic concentration of airborne particles required to trigger a biological sensor. You spent your mornings running exhaustive search and rescue drills, watching the golden retrievers sift through millions of scent molecules to locate a simulated lost hiker. You mapped the micro-expressions of the animals, learning to read the subtle tension in a shoulder muscle or the specific cadence of a pant as a highly complex language. You knew that a canine's olfactory bulb is 40 times larger than a human's, creating an absolute sensory overmatch that no Silicon Valley defense contractor could ever replicate with silicon and wire. The work was pure. It was grounded in a deep, spiritual empathy for a creature that operated entirely without malice, ego, or political agenda. You lived a quiet, rural life, blissfully ignorant of the violence brewing across the globe. Level 2. The acquisition. The erosion of that purity did not happen on a battlefield. It happened on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in a collapsed industrial park outside Jacksonville. The Regional Federal Task Force had hit a catastrophic operational wall. They summoned your volunteer search and rescue unit out of pure desperation. Human bomb technicians, entombed in 80-pound multi-million-dollar blast suits, had spent 12 agonizing hours sweating through their Nomex layers, failing entirely to locate a buried cache of highly unstable RDX explosives. The risk of a secondary detonation was paralyzing the entire grid. You walked your unarmored, joyful animal into the rubble. It took exactly 4 minutes. The dog sat perfectly still, tail wagging rhythmically against a piece of shattered concrete, entirely unaware of the lethal, devastating yield buried just inches beneath its paws. You tossed a tennis ball as a reward. The Department of Defense was watching the footage. They did not want to recruit a soldier. They wanted to acquire your unparalleled understanding of the biological machine. 2 weeks later, Commander Marcus Griggs sat across from you in a sterile, windowless government office. He did not appeal to your patriotism, he appealed to your scientific obsession. He offered a devastatingly logical proposition. Why rely on fallible mechanical sensors when you can weaponize millions of years of evolutionary perfection? Griggs offered unlimited, unaudited funding. He offered access to the most genetically flawless, highly classified Belgian Malinois bloodlines on the planet. The logical pressure was absolute. You rationalized the choice instantly, building an architecture of self-deception that would define the rest of your life. You told yourself you were merely conducting advanced behavioral science in a high-stakes, geopolitically funded laboratory. You initiated the necessary psychological compartmentalization. You ruthlessly separated your deep, spiritual bond with the animal from the cold, bureaucratic reality that the dog would soon become expendable operational gear. Level 3. The Force Multiplier. 6 months later, the damp, familiar earth of Ocala was entirely gone, replaced by the blinding dust and concrete isolation of forward operating Base Delta. Your world shrank to the clinical dimensions of the sterile steel kennels. This was where the military issued Titan. He was not a pet. He was a 78-pound, $50,000 tactical asset. He was a biological weapon system wrapped in fur and muscle. You calculated his maintenance purely in the language of military logistics and overhead costs, the highly specialized, calorie-dense diet, the aggressive, preventative veterinary care, administered by Dr. Elena Rostova, and the relentless, grinding cycle of physiological degradation and recovery. But beneath the dry financial metrics, Titan was a terrifying marvel of lethal biology. His baseline resting heart rate hovered at a calm, rhythmic 65 beats per minute. But the exact second you lifted the heavy, rigid frame of his $30,000 K9 Storm Kevlar vest, the conditioning took over. The moment the buckles clicked into place over his ribcage, his heart rate violently spiked to 140 beats per minute. It was a flawless, Pavlovian physiological response to the armor. You were no longer just a man and a dog walking through the dirt. You were a single, integrated weapons platform, Titan was classified as a biological force multiplier, utilized explicitly to minimize human casualty rates. The military command structure viewed him as the ultimate tool for liability mitigation. Sending an animal into a blind, pitch-black corner instead of a Tier 1, human operator drastically reduced the catastrophic financial blow of life insurance payouts. To survive the reality of what you were doing to him, you began to view the horrific violence of a night raid not as warfare, but as a tightly controlled operant conditioning loop. When Titan struck a hostile target, you trained yourself not to see tearing flesh or spilled blood. You saw the successful execution of a trained command. You outsourced your situational awareness entirely to his superior sensory array. You stopped looking at the environment and started watching the biometric telemetry screen strapped to your chest, monitoring his core temperature and heart rate. You read his microscopic ear flicks and tail drops as a real-time, localized threat matrix analysis. You were stripping away his canine innocence, piece by piece, replacing it with the brutal, uncompromising mathematics of close-quarters battle. Level 4. The calculus of violence. The transition from theory to practice required you to master the suffocating, claustrophobic environment of close-quarters battle. CQB is a world governed by fractions of a second and agonizingly rigid rules of engagement. In the plywood mock houses on the edge of the base, you practiced the lethal dance with your tactical partner, spotter Elias Thorne. Thorne was a hardened operator who viewed the dog purely through the lens of utility. He was the cold logic balancing your biological empathy. The contrast between your movements and Titan's was stark. You and Thorne executed slow, methodical, surgical footwork, stepping softly to minimize audio signature, slicing the angles of every doorway with mathematical precision. Titan, however, was a vessel of explosive, unpredictable kinetic momentum. He was designed to breach the threshold and overwhelm the enemy's processing speed. You had to perform an agonizing legal and moral calculus before every simulated release. Unleashing the carabiner was not like firing a rifle. A bullet travels in a straight line, but a dog makes independent, biological decisions. Once Titan was off the leash, there was no mechanical safety switch to recall him. You were deploying a lethal asset governed entirely by the strength of your prior conditioning. A full sprint impact from the Malinois transferred roughly 1,200 pounds of kinetic energy directly into a target's chest, instantly followed by a jaw pressure of 320 pounds per square inch. You trained him meticulously to target the brachial or femoral arteries, not to kill, but to force rapid, overwhelming physical compliance. You sterilized the violence in your mind. It wasn't an attack, it was a kinetic strike. It wasn't a mauling, it was the neutralization of the target's mobility. You drowned your conscience in this sterile military lexicon, ignoring the terrifying reality that Titan was beginning to love the adrenaline of the takedown, more than the tennis ball you offered as a reward. Level 5. The Zero Visibility Descent. The heavy steel doors of the subterranean bunker in Al-Anbar province slide open, exhaling a breath of stagnant, trapped air that tastes of pulverized concrete, ozone, and old blood. The darkness inside is absolute, a thick, suffocating void that instantly blinds the human eye. You pull the dual-tube night vision goggles down over your face, and the world snaps into a harsh, granular green phosphor nightmare. Beside you, Elias Thorne raises his suppressed carbine, his breathing slow and measured, a professional settling into his rhythm. But you are not looking at the hallway. You are looking down at the biometric telemetry screen glowing faintly against your chest rig. Titan's heart rate is holding at a steady 145 beats per minute. He does not need the green phosphor optics. To his 300 million olfactory receptors, the pitch-black corridor is illuminated brighter than daylight by the microscopic chemical off-gassing of adrenaline, cordite, and human sweat. The heavy carabiner leash is pulled taut in your right hand, digging into your tactical gloves. You step into the abyss. The tactical rhythm of the operation is dictated entirely by the tension on that 2,500-pound tensile strength line. You move in a state of pure sensory overmatch, your mind completely synchronized with the animal. Every microscopic twitch of his ears, every sudden dip in his posture, serves as a real-time threat matrix analysis, fed directly into your hands. You bypass blind corners that would normally require human operators to expose their ceramic plates to hostile fire. You do not speak, you do not issue verbal commands. You simply shift your hips, and the dog understands the exact angle of the approach. Deep in the bunker, behind a reinforced wooden door, the high-value target is waiting in terrified silence. The collateral damage estimate for this specific subterranean sector is mathematically 0. There are no civilians here, only hostiles. You reach down to the harness. You unclip the carabiner. The sharp, heavy clack of the metal detaching from the Kevlar rig echoes like a gunshot in the dead silence. Level 6. The audit trail. The 4 seconds following the release of the leash are the longest, most agonizing span of time in your life. You hold your breath, your finger resting just outside the trigger guard. The terrifyingly silent patter of padded paws sprints across the cracked concrete floor. Titan is a 78-pound biological missile navigating total darkness at 30 miles per hour. You cannot see the impact, but you feel the reverberation of it. A dull, muffled thud of a human body slamming violently into the drywall ahead. There are no screams, only the heavy, chaotic scuffle of a target whose mobility has been instantly and surgically neutralized. Level 9. The severance. The physical toll of the tactical ecosystem eventually catches up to the biological limitations of the human frame. You are medically retired, handed a modest pension, and immediately stripped of your operational clearances. Titan is classified as a $50,000 piece of specialized military hardware, and the Department of Defense does not allow broken operators to take government property home. The handover takes place on the blistering, sun-baked tarmac of a military airfield in Virginia, entirely devoid of ceremony or sentiment. You are holding the heavy, 2,500-pound, tensile-strength carabiner leash for the final time. The reassigned younger handler walks toward you across the concrete. He is a 22-year-old operator with cold, unblinking eyes. To him, Titan is nothing more than a biological force multiplier, a tool to be pointed at a hostile vector and unleashed. You hand over the leash. The sharp, heavy clack of the metal carabiner detaching from your glove is the most finalizing sound. Titan does not look back at you. His ears are pinned forward, his muscles coiled tight beneath the $30,000 K9 Storm Kevlar vest. The dog's heart rate is already spiking, addicted to the phantom adrenaline of the next breach. Entirely consumed by the operator conditioning loop, you have turned an innocent creature into a heat-seeking missile. And now, that missile belongs to the infinite, grinding machinery of the forever war. Level 10. The Void and the Cycle. The transition back to the quiet, humid pine forests of Ocala, Florida, is a psychological amputation. The silence of the civilian world is deafening, broken only by the phantom, dead, electric static of a radio earpiece that no longer exists. You cannot walk through the woods without unconsciously scanning the tree line for snipers or plotting the safest tactical egress routes. In a desperate, hollow attempt to reclaim a sliver of your lost humanity, you drive to the county animal shelter. But as you look down at the animal, your brain fundamentally betrays you. The corruption is absolute. You do not see a pet. You see an untrained, liability-heavy asset. You calculate the collateral damage estimate of the dog knocking over a chair. You broke the only pure connection you ever had in this world, trading the sacred innocence of nature for temporary, brutal operational supremacy. Somewhere across the globe, in a pitch-black subterranean bunker, Titan is sprinting through the darkness, entirely detached from his own nature. You can train an animal to survive a war, but you cannot train yourself to survive the guilt of destroying its innocence. The silence of the cabin awaits you, a cage built from your own rationalizations, where you will spend the rest of your life calculating. The story you just heard is a work of fiction, but the systemic architecture, the corruption, and the brutal mathematics of this world are entirely real and operating right now. A loop without end is greater than. If this descent into the shadows made you question the systems around you, drop a comment below and tell me your biggest takeaway. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dive into the abyss. See you in the next one.